Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us for the CTNS Public Forum today. My name is Braden Mulhook. I'm the director of the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences here at the Graduate Theological Union. And I'm very happy today to present our speaker. We have with us Dr. Anna Puzio, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Twente and with the International Research Program, Ethics of Socially Disruptive Technologies. And she's been here the last couple months as a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley and has graciously given us some time to talk about her work. The title of her talk tonight is On the Rise of Posthuman Visions and How They Are Transforming Anthropology of Technology. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, so my name is Anna Puzio. I'm both a philosopher and theologian, and I work on ethics of technology. I'll give you a quick introduction to my work, since many of you perhaps don't know my work yet. So I work, for example, on the intersections of religion and technology. So I'm working on religious avatars or religious robots. So robots employed in religious practices. I also conducted a study with the Now robot, so I tried to find out there, how the religious community feels with robots, not only theologians as experts. And lately I'm doing some research on death technology and LMMs for religions. Today I will focus on anthropology of technology. So my research is part of this research program ESDIT, Ethics of Socially Disruptive Technologies. And the main thesis of this research program, so it's a huge research program in the Netherlands, is that ethical concepts are being disrupted by emerging technologies. So we investigate social disruptions and disruptions of ethical concepts such as autonomy, responsibility, agency. And my work focuses now on the human being, so how the human being is disrupted. I will introduce first to you the posthuman and the rise of posthuman visions. Afterwards, I will talk about the first vision, the vision of transhumanism, then the second vision, this vision of new materialism, and then I will think, maybe also together with you, how this transforms now anthropology of technology. So here you can first see many disruptions of the human being that people experience. So identity, relationships are changed by new technologies, body, reproduction, so how life begins with extragastative technologies. We change and transform cognitive capabilities, health, even life and death with death technology. And this also leads to a need for orientation in society. So people are asking whether machines can have consciousness or be intelligence, like humanoid robots, for example. What distinguishes us from machines? Our understanding of the human being is always negotiated in relationship to our environment, to technology and to nature. So the technological inventions of each era, each time have always shaped how humans understood themselves. So how do we understand the human being in light of today's new technologies? And here we can see some visions of the posthuman arising. I would distinguish here three main types of the posthumans, though they are likely more and more differentiated. First, the posthuman as envisioned in transhumanism, posthumanism, and other techno-ideologies. Second, the societal imaginaries of a future human being, so a human being that can be optimized. What does this optimized human of the future look like? Is it still a human? But these debates are also often influenced by transhumanist thought. And third, there's posthumanism as an interdisciplinary, often also philosophical and academic engagement, which does not aim to overcome the human being, but seeks to transform the humanist conception of the human. So this includes thinkers like Michel Foucault, Catherine Hayles, Donna Haraway, Karen Barad. And what they all have together is that the traditional understanding of the human is being overcome, and the boundaries between human technology and nature begin to blur. In my talk, I will focus especially on the first and third strands, so on transhumanism as an ideology, and the third, posthumanism or new materialism as a new understanding of the human being. This is an interesting book that I found on Post Everything. This book investigates the intellectual history of post concepts. So we have so many post concepts right now. We have post-colonial, we have post-truth era, we have many different examples how people make sense of our how they describe it. The different concepts they differ a lot, but it's an attempt to make sense of a changing world. And these concepts also signal that people begin to conceive themselves, their societies, or their understanding of the world as moving beyond something that met the demands of the time. So it's it's like a cut in a time or in a word, in a particular way of thinking or thinking about the human being. I now want to examine the two conceptions of the posthuman and how they transform anthropology. First, transhumanism. So I know that there are so many experts here on transhumanism, so I think I will keep this very short. Transhumanism for me is this philosophical, technological movement which began in the 21st century, which seeks to fundamentally transform humans through technologies. And topics of transhumanism are radical life extension, cryonics, they see suffering, aging and death as awful conditions to be overcome. They argue for human enhancement, for a fusion of body and technology, and they want somehow to create new, also virtual worlds of experience, new perceptions and sensory capabilities. And we can differentiate here transhumanism from posthumanism. Transhumanism wants rather to transform. Posthumanism, so technological posthumanism, wants to overcome the human species with technology. So, but the visions are not clear-cut and very similar. For example, mind uploading, uploading of a mind to an external medium, and the vision of singularity. And in this, in this book that I just showed to you, I did an investigation of the anthropology of transhumanism. So what's the human conception of transhumanism? I'll just briefly show you the results. So first, they focus on a human nature, so a fixed human nature. They understand the human being as a machine, so you can find different metaphors here. So also human being as a computer, human being as a program. They understand the human being as genetically coded. So here's also a determinism that everything is coded in genetics. And they understand the human, in neuroscientific terms, but in the sense that the human being is its brain. So everything that human being is can be found in the human's brain. And so the problem here is that, for example, if we take now genetics, they argue that the whole human being can be deciphered and understood and ultimately also reprogrammed. So they view the human being as fully understandable and therefore reprogrammable. And also because they see the human as an informational pattern, it can be easily transferred to a machine because it's just a pattern. I'll show you some more findings on the anthropology of transhumanism. So transhumanism often contradicts scientific findings. It has a pseudo-scientific character. It focuses on cognition and the brain, so cerebrocentrism, how Thomas Fuchs called it, for example. The human being as nothing but their brain. They have a reductionist view of the body, so they view body as a mere data carrier. But they also reduce the whole human being to information processes. They have problematic conceptions of information, so this is not one information understanding. And everything follows the transhumanist goals, which are efficiency, productivity, economic gain, control, power, happiness, perfection. Even these technological visions are intertwined with economic interests. So human beings and life itself are understood as computational processes with the goal of profit maximization. So education, biology, and even extended lifespan are all framed in economic terms. It's not for well-being, it's for economy. So you can find this, for example, in Ray Kurzweil's book or in Nick Bostrom's book on superintelligence. And they also discriminate against certain groups and have eugenic ambitions. Yeah. So transhumanism lacks a responsible conception of the human being. Its goal is the creation of a technological posthuman. But what exactly is this posthuman? The concept is vague and often contradictory. Ultimately, it is a human being enhanced according to transhumanist values. So what transhumanism defines as good and desirable. So they say the whole future will be better, we will be better people and we will have better lives, but it's defined under the terms how transhumanists understand good and desirable. And this usually means young, idealized, non-aging bodies. They are not female bodies, not bodies with disabilities, not diverse human forms. But also this version clearly moves toward the machine. So the human being is devalued in comparison to the machine. So it's reduced to a flawed algorithm in urgent need of revision. Technology, in the end, is more valuable for transhumanism. So you can see here this quote, for example, Bostrom compares it, the human compares the human brain to smartphones. On one estimate, the adult human brain stores about 1 million bytes, a couple of orders of magnitude less than a low-end smartphone. And then he makes this long comparison between computers and human brains. In the end, the computer wins. I identify transhumanism as a techno-ideology. That's a long discourse. I'm referring to Hannah Arendt here. But what I found particularly dangerous about transhumanism is that it engages in a dangerous form of complexity reduction. So the particularly problematic is the claim that all of the world's problems can be solved by a single means, namely technology. So aging, disease, death, poverty, all social problems, social injustice, hunger, climate crisis, technology alone can fix these problems that societies have struggled for generations. And I think that transhumanism now seems to be unfolding its real impact, or techno-ideologies in general, against the backdrop of current US politics as well, because we now can see how these techno-ideologies intersect with political agendas as well, with Musk and Trump, for example. One last quote to transhumanism, for transhumanism. So the relationship between nature, human being, and technology is shaped by a logic of domination and empowerment. So here's one frightening quote from Kurzweil's book already in 2005. And the last sentence of his book reveals the transhumanist agenda. But it turns out that we are central, after all. Technology, that development enabled the persistence of the accelerating pace that started the biological evolution. It will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips. And this you can see in the whole book, how they not only want to change the human being, but in the end, they want to change space, time, universe, everything. So full control. Okay. Then I would like to present to you, so this was rather my book, my past project, but now I'm working a lot on ethics of technology, and I'm deeply influenced by new materialism. That's Donna Haraway and Karen Barad, for example. You can see the two influential books of them. And new materialism is very different from this. It has the so the names are so similar with posthumanism sometimes, so that makes it very difficult. But new materialism is about rethinking the human being and not changing the human being with technology. So it's an interdisciplinary and heterogeneous current of thought that emerged in the 90s. Different fields. You can also see a list of proponents. And the key themes of new materialism are rethinking matter, reflections on ontology, knowledge production. So interestingly, metaphysics has a revival here. Subject-object relationship. They criticize anthropocentrism, focus on non-human entities. And yeah, I cannot delve too deep into it, but one central figure of new materialism to understand it is the cyborg figure, which shows a hybrid identity, a cyborg as a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism, creature of social reality, as well as a creature of fiction. So you can see here relationality and open identity in relation to the non-human. They see a blurring of boundaries between human, animal, organism, machine, physical, non-physical, and they criticize dualisms, binary thinking, dichotomies, self, other, women, man, mind, body, for example, nature, culture. Just to make it a bit more complex, so the basis for new materialism is a relational ontology. So a radical relational ontology. They argue that there are no prior entities with fixed properties, nor are there pre-existing subjects and objects. Humans, bodies, and non-human entities, they never pre-exist, but instead they come into being only in and through relationships. This is this relational ontology. Being every entity's, its properties, it only comes into being in and through relationships. So they argue then also for non-human agency. They have a very broad understanding of agency, and for the entanglement of human and non-human, which means here nature and technology. So to sum up, what is the post-human in new materialism? They propose to move beyond the traditional humanist understanding of the human being. So they criticize essentialism, universalism, and the lack of diversity. So that's a very Western-oriented understanding of the human being. They argue towards post-anthropocentrism and post-speciesism. Human beings are seen as inseparable in an inseparable relationship with the non-human. So they're deeply entangled. You cannot really disentangle them. Yeah, and you can find a more detailed discussion of this in my publication. But for now, I'd like to move on to the final step and ask, how do these visions of the post-human transform now anthropology? I define anthropology of technology as a field that reflects on the being in the context of technology. Transhumanism and its problematic conception of the human being make it very clear that we need an anthropology of technology. Though many people also in research are arguing that we should stop doing anthropology of technology because the human being cannot be defined and it's always discriminatory. I completely agree with that. So I do think that it's that we don't need we can't have a definition of the human being. And I also don't like these catalogs of human properties, but I do think that anthropological research, so in scientific understanding of the human being, is crucial, especially if we look at these techno-ideologies, or to understand how technology changes the human being and the human body. I argue here that the rise of the post-human marks a caesura in anthropological thinking. So it's a cut here. It shows a deep uncertainty as the boundaries between human technologies and nature begin to blur. In the end, I'm arguing for an post-anthropocentric anthropology, which seems a bit paradox, but I do think that we should take this relationship we should focus on the relationship with the non-human, because how we understand ourselves is always we understand it ourselves always in relationship to others and also to the non-human. So here's a cut and an uncertainty, but the key question now is, in which direction should we move from here? And I've already showed you the transhuman understanding first. So we can see here the posthuman in transhumanism, that is a reductionist, devaluing conception of the human being. There's little potential for freedom, no space for the development of anthropology, and in my view, also not compatibility with Christian theology. So I deeply disagree with the Christianity is transhumanism, or transhumanism is Christianity thesis. This disorientation, also caused by new technologies, so the societal disruption, is something that transhumanism exploits. So they use this orientation that we have. They're quite good in media impact, and they give the answers that researchers are often not giving. So they give very simple, clear, convincing answers. And the human is not understood here in relation to the machine, but rather replaced by it. Okay, and then we have the second understanding of the posthuman in new materialism. And it's also, it's not only new materialism, but it's, of course, maybe you realize it's very similar to all the relational approaches that are now so trending in ethics of technology. So there's postphenomenology, there's mediation theory, actor network theory, Latour. They are all very similar in this way of thinking. And they offer potential to rethink what it means to be human, especially in relation to the non-human. However, it remains very unclear how new materialism, but also these relational approaches in general, can be translated into practice and practical ethics. These theories are often quite vague and unclear, or they're not made for practice yet. The question is whether a non-anthropocentric anthropology is possible in the end, and I argue that it is, and that is crucial to pursue one. But let's now turn on to theological perspectives, especially now that we may very well have an AI probe. This might be good for everyone working on ethics of technology at the intersections with religion. Oh, what happened? Okay. Why is anthropology relevant for theology? So because theology is theos, God. Karana argued for the anthropological turn in theology. So theology is a discourse about God, but always in relation to the human being and from the perspective of the human being. In the sense that speaking about God always also means speaking about the human being. We cannot escape this human perspective. And now our conditions, our societies, our world is changing with technology. So we have to ask, what are the conditions of possibility for human beings to speak about God? We need to reflect about this new human conditions today. And while Karana argued for an anthropological turn, we could also ask about the post-human or post-anthropological turn, because a lot changed since then. I will briefly introduce 4 perspectives for theology today. First, the dynamic understanding of the human being. A flexible, dynamic, and open conception of the human being is crucial. One that is not reductionist and does not confine the human to a fixed catalog of characteristics, which is open to transformation, also technological transformation, and to the diversity of human beings. I do think that we have a big repertoire in our theological sources for especially this dynamic understanding of the human being. This openness is well captured in Haraway's figure of the cyborg, which is also hybrid and dynamic. And there are a lot of theologians working on, for example, also Stephen Garner, Thea Bates, who all apply the cyborg figure now, also to theological concepts, because they also see a lot of hybridity in theological concepts as well. In contrast to this, technologies often embed a rather static conception of the human being. So they don't, they cannot mirror the dynamic understanding of the human being often, but there are approaches to make it more dynamic. Relationships. Relationality indeed is a key paradigm in theological thinking, and that's why I think it's crucial to reflect on that. But so far the focus has primarily been been on human-human relationships, also to human-God relationship. Relationships to nature and especially technology remain still underrepresented. And we know, everyone working on ethics of technology knows this whole social robot debate, the attachment we have to robots, to chatbots. So in the press lately, the whole attachment to chatbots was discussed, or also the relationship to our body with these technologies. Instead of engaging in essentialist attempts to draw sharp boundaries between humans and technology, theological anthropology can shift the focus toward our relationships with technology. So this allows us to see technology not merely as a tool, which was also seen for a long time, I think, by these theological sources from Vatican, as a tool, as an instrument, but rather as something that shapes us and co-determines our identity. Because these technologies also change us. The knowledge that ChatGPT produces changes our identity also as researchers, and how we perceive the world. And this is interesting because with new materialism, then the guiding question shifts. It's not about how we distinguish between human, animal, and machine, but rather how can we cultivate, how can we foster, develop good relationships? And this, I think, is an important question, how can we develop technology for good relationships between nature, technology, and the human being. Third point, I think we need a more than human approach that recognizes the own way of being of different entities. So to move beyond human standards and acknowledge the own way of being of non-human entities, referring also to Heidegger, that we all are bound to a context, to a time, and we are all bound to different bodies and environments. So for example, we are often comparing intelligence, agency. We are always comparing this to human standards. So here you can see it. We are often comparing the non-human to the human, and also you can see to a very particular kind of human. So this is also not the only human image that we have. And I rather argue that we should not apply human standards to the human, but instead recognize their own way of being. So their own context, bodies, environments. So for example, we cannot call a dolphin not intelligent just because a dolphin cannot use a computer, but because of course it can have an intelligence bound to its own body, but it cannot operate in the way we are doing it. And I'm also thinking in ethics of technology, how we can develop more than human concepts. So how we can rethink our ethical concepts, such as agency, for example, in a more than non-human way. I also struggled, for example, with the personhood concept a bit, because many people in ethics are trying whether it fits with the non-human as well. And I would propose rather a more than human concept instead of transferring the human ones. And what are the specifically theological perspectives? So I think that it's the responsibility of religions, of theology, to emphasize vulnerability in their discourse and draw attention to marginalized groups. So those who are often left without a voice in these debates. In anthropological terms, in whose image are we designing technology? Who's getting replicated in all these AI avatars? It brings also strong focus on justice, but raises the important question, justice for whom? So also in the context of this new pontificate, the new pope, I think we might expect a focus on global justice and the gap maybe between rich and poor, or that's also what I hope for. But we also must also ask, what about bodies, women, queer people, groups that are often disadvantaged or rendered invisible by current technological developments? So how do we react to this as theologians? And to make it a bit more clear, because it was very theoretical and abstract, I just brought some examples to visualize it. So here you can see how that, for example, medical technologies always have a view of the human body, a standard view of the human body. So this is how I argue that there's always a concept of the human being always embedded in our technologies. You can see this in body scanners. Body scanners always have a very standard body view of the body, and that's why they are discriminatory against, for example, transgender people, because they don't, they cannot detect the body of a transgender person, and that's why they are marking them as dangerous. They are also discriminatory against people with disabilities because you cannot use them, or they don't function right if you have technology or something implemented in your body, or your body is just not the standard body that they are programmed for. It's also apparent self-tracking. I'm also thinking about how can we design good human, non-human relationships. So for example, this whole surveillance technology is of course not the best example for good human technology relationships. It also becomes apparent in self-tracking, how we use how we use the technology for our agency to make body decisions. So you can see here how we are in a relationship, a network assemblage of human and non-human, where we don't make this decision based on our own thinking, but always in relationship with technology. Yeah, and the question, I don't have this answer yet, but also for the future, what do we think about this whole AI duplicates, AI avatars, grief bot, death bots? What kind of relationships do we have here? Are these kind of relationships desirable? How should we shape those kind of relationships? Yes, so I'm looking forward to the discussion, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we'll open it up for discussion. So if people on Zoom have a question, you can either maybe write your name in the chat, and we can try and get an order that way, so we're not just speaking over each other. And if there's anybody here in the room, feel free to raise your hand. Looks like Ted might want to have the first go.
Can you hear me satisfactorily?
Yes.
Anna, that was terrific. Thank you for very careful delineation of what the issues are. I have 2 or 3 questions. Let me just try one. Did I hear you correctly that you're embracing both the new materialism as well as an ontology of relationality? Let me just ask, why do you need the new materialism? You could have an ontology of relationality without the materialism. For example, Whiteheadian metaphysics will give you a totally relationalist ontology without a materialism. Let me ask, what does the new materialism do for you that you couldn't get, without some other ontology of relationality?
Thank you very much, Ted, for your question. I think the special thing about the naturalism is that they are connecting metaphysics and ethics. So they make strong normative claims. It's a very diversity-oriented, also feminist-oriented and biopolitical way of thinking. And what I find convincing that they reveal power structures in ontology. So with their way of thinking, it's possible to look at ontology and see that the way how we differentiate what the human is from the non-human, what life is, what non-life is, where life begins, is always based on power relations, also on politics, on narratives, on laws, and everything. So that's why what I find very compelling. And also, for example, we already know a bit of this from Foucault.
And they add to Foucault that Foucault or also Butler, they always only looked at the human being, and so that the human body or the human being is constructed or influenced by power relations. And what new materialism does is to look also at the non-human being and to say that also how we think about the non-human is constructed and it emerges also of power relations. So when we look at how we understand whether we say that animals can have pain, so this is also that's changed over so many centuries, or how we behave to certain animals. So these attitudes and relationships are so much changing and influenced by us.
Yeah, if I heard you correctly, I believe that you said that you would not support religious understandings of transhumanism. And so is that because you feel that that is a category mistake in the sense of transhumanist visions tend to be anthropocentric, they seem to be deterministic, and you think that the theological project should be moving beyond that? Or is there another reason in which, should we be engaging in theological anthropology or theologies of technology rather than trying to embrace a religious vision of transhumanism?
Yeah, so I do think that it's important to deal, of course, with technology and to have an ethics of technology from a theological and religious perspective. I do not think that the main problem of transhumanism is anthropocentrism. I think that the main problem is this ideological character. So their argumentation structures, how they want to create this perfect human being without so how they would like to erase other human beings, or their political attitudes, which become very apparent today. How they merge with politics. So for me, it's so just a very maybe not a very scientific comparison, but for me, right-wing populism is not compatible with Christianity, and so does not transhumanism. Is not compatible with Christianity as well, just because of the ethics and the normative implications. It doesn't work. Do you agree, or do you have a different?
Well, I think it's interesting because we use the term religious transhumanism. There's a group that calls themselves the Christian Transhumanist Association.
Okay.
And so I wonder how Micah, the founder of the group, would think about that, considering that since he's done that, he's also gone on to do his own theological education. That would be an interesting conversation to put the two of you in a room together. Ted, you might want to jump in with this as well.
Yeah, I actually invited Micah Redding, whom you're speaking of. I was hoping he could show up today just to think about that. And at any rate, it would be a good idea to talk about why one could or should not try to have a religious version of transhumanism. If I have the floor, maybe I can ask a second question. I think I heard you say that you wanted a de-anthropocentrized ontology here, a de-anthropocentrized naturalism. But then I wasn't sure why it was important to you to talk about relationships between the human and the non-human, the human and the animal, or the human and the machine or the technology. Just as an aside, when I think about Martin Heidegger and that whole tradition, we human beings are already technological before we wake up and try to understand ourselves. We're already in an inextricable relationship to technology that is predefined for us. And so in your mind, is there anything alienating as transhumanists propose the cyborg or propose advancing the dynamic, you talked about Homo sapiens as being dynamic, advancing it so that we have integration with new levels of technology. I wasn't sure, Anna, in listening to you, whether you thought it's a good idea to become a cyborg or a bad idea to become a cyborg. If it's a bad idea, then that would suggest anthropocentrism, I would think. If it's a good idea, then perhaps that would be something more than human in your framework. Could you just help clarify for me what your stand is there in terms of anthropocentrism and its opposite?
That's a very complex question with different parts. Yeah, I try to to think about it a bit. So maybe just for clarification to the transhumanist for the transhumanist part, I'm not quite sure whether we have the same also understanding of transhumanism, because I also have a very very narrow understanding of transhumanism as an organization, also with its own institutions only, and not the whole technological discourse, but okay. And I really like that you brought up the question of relationships, because what is indeed not clear, and not only in new materialism, but in all these relational approaches in ethics of technology, is what these relationships are. So and also not so, because first it could be we are in a relationship, we can be in a relationship with the whole world in the end. We can be in a relationship with everyone. But then, of course, we should also look at what relationships are normative, significant for us, and what kind of relationships we consider valuable as well. So this is something that's still not discussed in posthumanology, in new materialism, also active network theory, not too much. So this is of course difficult. I agree with Heidegger, but Heidegger is also used for posthumanological studies. So he's also transferred in these relational approaches with his being conception of the being. I think that the benefit of this relational understanding, or what it tries to how it tries to distinguish itself, is that it's so the enemy of the relational approach is the understanding of technology as an instrument, as a tool, because the tool understanding cannot see how much technology or the non-human can influence and shape who we are, how we act, how they change who we are, and change our societies for the good or for the bad. So this is mainly my very broad answer. I'm not sure whether I answered all your questions.
Chris, did you have a question? I do. Yeah. Thank you for the talk. I found this really interesting. I'm not sure. I actually have two questions. I'm not sure, but they're related. I'm not sure which one to ask first. So the first, I guess I'll ask this first, which I think may give you a context for my second question.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you've, I'm thinking about, I guess this is more a comment than a question. I'm thinking about the concept of extended mind as it's described by a few people, Andy Clark, Lambros Malafouras, the anthropologist, the way it's been used by some archaeologists, paleoanthropologists and archaeologists, as an element in the explanation for cognitive evolution. So the relationship of environment and tools being not merely things in a relationship to a human being, but actually qualities of mind. So that the mind is not a brain specific condition, but something that actually exists within an environment, brain in an environment. So that's the context of this question. I'd like to understand better what you're describing as a relational or perhaps dialogical ontology. What exactly is at play in that relationship, because I'm used to thinking, or I've become used to thinking that that it's not really a relation, it's not so much a relationship as it is a condition of embeddedness that a human being finds oneself in. So the distinction between the human being and things, animals, whatever, becomes a much smaller distinction than in the sort of common Western, way of looking at the human himself as a conscience, centered on the brain, centered on individual perception, and everything else surrounding it. So
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give you a satisfying answer to for this. So yeah, I do agree with the extended mind. So I've not done too much research on the extended mind theory, but I'm familiar with it. But what I'm also working on is with colleagues, we are working on an article which compares all the relational approaches that we have and tries to look at what are the differences in the end. So for example, what is the difference in the end for posthumanology and action network theory, new materialism, and to look also what kind of understanding of relationship they have. And we look at the metaphysical, on the metaphysical level, so how they draw the boundaries between human and non-human beings, and they are very, very similar in the end. I'm not sure how this relates to extended mind. So I'm because I work on transhumanism and the neuroscientific discourse, I'm very familiar with this phenomenological or neuroscientific understanding of the brain. So for example, there's Thomas Fuchs in Germany working on neuroscience, and he's also I just realized that in English it's also brain as relational organ. So in German it's Beziehungsorgan. So this also has its relationality, but yeah, he looks at this from a neuroscience perspective, and then there's still this differentiation between the world and us and different entities, how he looks at it, I think. And this does not capture this blurring of boundaries, which leads to the posthuman and soul disruption of anthropology and how we understand ourselves. So this is what I'm missing there. Yeah, but I would love to think more with you about this. Very interesting. Thank you.
Something I've been thinking about in terms of relationship between humans and non-human is two aspects. There's first communication, and that how much are we actually able to effectively communicate with the non-human. And I think that that's complicated by the second factor of our tendency to do things like anthropomorphize. That we're seeing that with technology, but I think we can also apply that to other non-human species. And so I liked the way that you talked about, well, it isn't that a dolphin's not intelligent, just a dolphin can't use its flipper to move a mouse. But that's not to say that there isn't intelligence, but how do we know what the dolphin intelligence is when we already bring our own preconceived notions of intelligence to a conversation that we're not effectively able to have yet?
Yeah.
It's a hard question.
Yeah, it's I think that this question cannot be answered. Yeah, but yeah, it's a good one, of course. It's so the whole, I think that other also called more the human approaches have the problem that in the end they somehow turn to listeners maybe, and this is also something more like a very speculative way, but also as a they somehow have to take the stance or to give others a voice, but through their own voice, so like the parliament of things, the parliament academia, and so it ends in a way of representation. I haven't found a convincing answer to this yet. I of course see this anthropocentrism and that we cannot go beyond this. I see, for example, in law, which is also known for not so not good for change because it's also very anthropocentric. But you know, with this indigenous legal frameworks and with Western frameworks that are enriched with indigenous thought, for example, in New Zealand, there was this with the river and how they changed this and see the river as a living being and give it some value from this perspective. So there are some approaches, but yeah, I do think that even so, I'm critical about humanoid design and that we're duplicating ourselves in technology, but I also see that we anthropomorphize really everything. So I also tend to anthropomorphize the Waymos, for example. So it's with ChatGPT, so non-human. So yeah, yeah.
So to like expand your like comments, like I see some like conflict between your idea and the current legal and the like responsible system. Like when you expand those kind of like subject, who is in charge of the like those like legal actions, like when you tackle like it. For me, it's kind of blurred. Like the subject, who the agency becomes blurry, and then the who is responsible for the action becomes also blurry, and then who has the rights of those like a certain like a moral something that also becomes blurred. So I'm kind of a skeptical that like your idea compatible with the current legal and the like ethical system.
Yeah, maybe from a new materialist perspective. So because that's an often comment that of course when responsibility is somehow or accountability is somehow erased when we don't have these ontological boundaries anymore, and there's also non-human agency. But what they are arguing for is not to erase all the boundaries, but to re-reflect those boundaries. So they say, for example, that they take even more accountability because they look on ontology and what injustice, also epistemic injustice, ontological injustice, we are already doing maybe with this non-human being sometimes. Yes, but yeah, maybe we already, if we think about legal implications, we already think in networks and we see how entangled it in the end is human identity and the non-human one. Because when we have, for example, the staff bots, and there's then there's not only the identity of the seized one, but also this AI, and it's so inseparable sometimes. And yeah, so this makes it very complicated, but that's why I also like this entanglement, because it shows how complicated it is. Thank you so much.
I think Ted maybe wanted to jump back in. Yeah, Ted, go ahead.
I do, but I don't want to take somebody else's place. I've already talked a lot.
No, you're okay.
Okay. Okay, Anna, in your own anthropology, what is the relationship between intelligence, emotion, and sin? Do you have room for sin? I'm thinking about two forms of non-human intelligence. Towards the end of your presentation, you talked about a survivor talking to a dead person. I presume something like ChatGPT is at work. And I presume that the dead person has no feeling and will not sin. Today on the news, let's talk about another form of non-human intelligence. Today on the news, it was reported that there's a pack of 6 or 8 orca whales near the Rock of Gibraltar that are sinking boats. They go after boats and they turn them over. 3 have sunk. They're angry. The reason they're angry, they think, is that one of the orcas was caught in a fisherman's net and didn't like it, and persuaded all the other orcas to go on this rampage, sinking boats with human beings in them. Now, orcas are very intelligent animals, but notice they have feelings and they're going to take revenge. So we have these two forms of non-human intelligence, one with emotion that can do violence, and I presume ChatGPT does not have any emotion and doesn't do violence. So as you develop your own anthropology in the face of non-human intelligence, do emotion and sin play any role in what you think is distinctively human? Or you don't have to answer this. Just speculate a little bit.
So what I've heard from what you said, I assume that you are supposing that animals can't have a sense for morality, I think. This is true. So I have the feeling that you draw a picture of animals that are led only by instincts and emotions and cannot have moral behavior, I think. And this is contested in research because studies show that they can really care for each other and can also have very different ways of behavior. But I do.
That they follow norms, that animals follow norms.
Yeah. And just two problems. I do think that it's always difficult to apply the animal part then of technology. So this is also something that I did. So that still doesn't work for me. I always compare it, but I do see the problems that you see. That I don't want this big bad guys in the end putting us in relationship only with technology. But I value the relationships with animals a lot. And the last one, I think I had forgotten. I think that's a different topic, but all this relational thinking is also very difficult when we think of invasive species, because this is also in the end very anthropocentric. So if there comes a species that attacks another species, we have somehow to decide which species we want to save. Because if we don't decide, then we also make a decision for one species. And this is also, so one colleague at UC Berkeley is working on troubled care from Haraway's viewpoint and combines it with biology, and also shows how anthropocentric in the end it is, because we decide then which life is more valuable. Yeah.
Well, and de-extinction technology, thinking that we can actually bring back
that we can
something.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ted.
Well, I have a weird question for you, and it's prompted by what you just said. So you just concluded by saying that the choice between the choices that people make regarding invasive species are very anthropocentric, but that also to make a species interested decision is also very animal-like. So it doesn't necessarily distinguish us from other animals that make decisions that way. So it's perfectly natural for us to act that way.
But to make this more complicated, it also depends on the relationship we have with the species. Because we can also see in cities when there comes a new squirrel entity species or a new duck species, then they get invasive and people don't want the old ducks or squirrels to be eaten or to be erased from the area. So they also get attached and want to save one and not the other. But I think that this way of thinking is or these theories are shifting our way of thinking rather than they are providing clear answers, because they are just a method or a mindset to change maybe the answers that we then have to find.
And I agree with the animals have and humans have the same animal motif, right?
Right.
But at the same time, humans have also the ability to step back and then think about the consequences of some that kind of thing. Result, right? So I'm going to argue with the imago Dei or humans as an imago Dei as a kenosis thing, this concept. Even though you can do something, but you empty yourself and then step down a bit and then for a benefit of others. That's the human uniqueness compared to other animals.
I mean, animals often will do altruistic things. That's observable. But humans do seem to be able to do more of it.
Yes.
What, do you have a definition of a human being?
No,
Like,
no,
you're talking about anthropology, but what would you say is the core of a human self?
Yeah, I just used anthropology, so I don't define the human being, but so for me anthropology is just this task to deal with the different reflections on the human being, so criticism, what kind of human reflections do we have in technology, in transhumanism or in science fiction, for example, and also productive, how the human being practical is changing with new technologies, but I don't define the human being. I also had talks for in front of a rather elderly group who was really exaggerated because the talk was like it's a human being, and I did not get. I refused to give an answer to this. I just refuse it because it's yeah, I cannot give a definition that embraces all human beings, and it's yeah, I cannot decide.
Oh, I see.
You know?
Oh,
It's
so
just
you're
a theological respect also.
a kind of particularist with regard to human beings.
You could also bring the imago Dei into it and then say that it's not definable. So excuse me.
Okay,
but-
okay, yes, I'd like to try and tie some of this conversation back to the first question that Ted asked, but I wonder, does new materialism give us a place to say, this is where humans might be acting anthropocentrically, and this is a way where humans might be acting like other species would in a given context or a given situation?
What do you concretely mean?
So for instance, you were talking about invasive species, so for instance, maybe acting anthropocentrically would have been introducing the cane toad into Australia to try and eat the cane beetle, which it didn't, and it ended up, wreaking havoc in the ecosystem of Australia. Whereas a new materialist, sort of post-human understanding of the world would say, is there a different approach to dealing with this invasive species? That wouldn't, to this problem that wouldn't include having to bring in an invasive species. I'm just trying to think, because we've made this idea that humans act like other animals, but we also act, in our own ways, in our own self-interest. So is there a way to try and adjudicate that in dealing with the non-humans?
I don't think so, because materialism never gets so concrete, so they never give concrete answers, so the theories are so vague, and also with different text parts, so also a literary style or biological style or quantum physics with Barad, and it's so difficult to understand it. And even then, so for example, I did have some understandings of some conceptions of materialism, or people are, for example, Haraway dropped the term post-gender world in the Cyber Manifesto, and people for many years discussed, is it possible to have a post-gender world? What is a post-gender world? And then in her interview, she just says, well, she brought it up one time and she never used it since then, and she didn't mean it, and she never, she never had a concept of this. And this is very similar to many concepts that they are discussing. Also, what's also forgotten is that these texts are always very much bound to the context, so the historical context. So the Cyber Manifesto from the 80s was referring to different politics, to different feminism. And they say, for example, because I've written some articles to interpret them in a queer feminist way as well, because there's a lot of queer feminist research based on materialism. But Haraway just said, yeah, I really like it. So she in this interview, she writes, I really like the queer feminist interpretations and I support it, but that's not what I meant, because I've written it in another time. And she says, but it's okay for me, I'm not the author anymore, I'm the reader of the manifesto, and now she's watching what people are doing with the manifesto. So it's, this is the way of thinking of the manifesto as a text, as a web, to more as a way of thinking, and thinking that evolves something, I guess, somehow.
Nice vision of ownership of ideas.
Yeah.
Any final questions or comments? Okay, let's thank Anna one more time.
Thank you so much for the discussions and everything. Thank you, and also for your patience here. And, thank you.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.